So there's a lot of information and opinions on the, on fuel injection in general and on the Fitech units. There's a few things I want to go over on this system, mainly to kind of help folks out. A lot of guys are carburetor guys, and this system is supposed to be a drop-in replacement for carburation, and the whole idea is that it's as easy as a carburetor and as cheap as a carburetor, close to it. That's why they've developed these systems, these throttle body systems like this. A few things that are helpful when you're doing a fuel injection system. They're a lot less tolerant of dirt. There are electronics involved, so interference, electrical interference is an important thing. Grounds are important, clean wiring. So I'll just go over a few things with this to try and help you guys out. I know there's a lot of guys that have questions about these systems, so hopefully this will answer some of those questions. So here's the unit with the air cleaner off. So I mentioned having a clean fuel system. This particular one that I have on here, I'm using an inline pump, which is actually not preferred. They are more problematic, they're more prone to issues. The Fitech pumps especially, that they come with in the kits, the inlines, they're kind of a Bosch 044 knockoff pump. They have issues. I had issues with mine. I put a Bosch 044 on this, kept it close to the tank, and low, below the tank actually, and it gives me no problems. Another couple of things. So this one has a return line because it's an inline pump. This is my fuel filter right here. I opted to do my own fuel system. I didn't use what came in the kit. I used a braided line, and which the line doesn't matter so much, but I did opt for a 10 micron Summit filter. It's got a replaceable element inside of it. It's also, you can clean it if you want. You want to keep it as close to the unit as possible. You don't want to put your filter down the line somewhere, because then anything that's potentially in that fuel line, when you put it together, could end up in the throttle body. You don't want that to happen. You can flush it if you do have it down the line. I just find it's better. You want to keep it as close to the throttle body as possible. So this is a 10 micron unit. There's also a pre-filter before the pump, which is a 40 micron unit. It's about the same size. You see, this is a pretty large body filter. It's got a lot more capacity. It won't get clogged up as easily, because the injectors have nozzles on them. They have high pressure nozzles, and you don't want the dirt getting in there to clog these things up. Because your injectors, on this particular unit, this is a 4 injector unit. I believe the Mean Street 800s have 8 injectors. I think the PA units all have 8 injectors. Somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's it. Not really too important. It's the same issue. You don't want dirt getting in here. These are the fuel rails on either side here, and this needs to be clean. Another thing, if you're firing one of these up for the first time, personally what I would do is run the fuel pump either not with the unit, or if you push the accelerator all the way to the floor, when you turn the key to the on position, it will not fire the injectors to prime. That way you don't inject any crap into the injectors on your first prime of the system. It'll simply return. That will work if you have a return line. If you don't, it does not. So, my suggestion is, pump some fuel through it before you let it go into the fuel rails, because you'll get dirt in there. Another common issue with these is the ground. You can see here, this is where the system is grounded. A lot of guys run a wire here, which is not a bad idea. You can run a ground wire here to a good ground. Personally, I didn't do that because I made sure I had a good connection here. I sanded the connections. I took the coating off of the washer and the nut here. And a good way to check this is to simply take an ohm meter and put a lead here, put a lead on your negative over here on the battery, or wherever your battery is. If you read, an ohm or less, you're in good shape. If you have resistance there, then you have a bad ground. That's an easy way to check that. you don't, I mean, it doesn't hurt to throw a wire on there, but if you don't want to have to add a wire, you can always check to make sure you got a good ground and clean it, and attempt to get it a better connection if you have some resistance there. But you should have less than an ohm, really. You're always going to have some resistance in your leads on your meter, but there's, you shouldn't have 5 ohms of resistance here or 10 ohms of resistance. That means you got a bad ground. So that's another good thing to do. Another thing I get asked about a lot too is also the a lot of guys want to put a fuel pressure gauge on. I know there's some remote units, which actually I'm thinking about putting on here, where you can actually see your fuel pressure. And the reason that's important is because this system doesn't tell you if you have low fuel pressure, because this system is expecting 58 psi. I believe the 400 units are 43 psi. Those are standard pressures. It's 3 and 4 bar, regulated by the regulator right here. Depending on what regulator you have, that sets the pressure. If you need 58 psi and you have less than that for some reason, then you're going to be running lean. And the system doesn't know why. It doesn't monitor the fuel pressure. It doesn't know that. So a lot of times when guys have crap in their fuel system, a plugged filter, those kinds of things or you have a bad fuel pump, that's another one that comes up frequently, your fuel pressure is going to be low. So it's important to know what your fuel pressure is. You got to make sure first that your fuel pressure is good. Because if it's not, you're going to be running lean, and you're probably going to try adjusting things, which is just going to whack it out more, or you might compensate for it for a little while until the problem becomes even more prominent. So that's important. The reason I mentioned keeping dirt out of the system too is because if you get an injector that fails, it'll still run, and you may not get a fault because it doesn't know it's clogged. It can't detect that. So you need to make sure you keep the dirt out of it. And you can always check and see too by looking when it's running. You can look in here and you should see fuel spraying out of all of them. The other thing that sometimes happens is one of them will get stuck open. If they don't all look even when it's sitting there idling, there's something wrong. That'll cause a real rich condition or a real lean condition depending on if your injectors are working or not. Remember, the system is smart, but it's not that smart. It doesn't know if an injector is stuck open or closed. It can't detect that. So fuel pressure gauge, real important. I get asked about this connection a lot. I'll post at the end of the video or below in the description what the size of this is. I believe it's 9/16 24. I always get it crossed up because the return is a different size, and I forget it's either bigger or smaller, but I'll post what that is in the description. But a lot of guys prefer to tap the plug here. You absolutely can do that. You can tap this with an 1/8 inch NPT. That's a little kludgy to me. I don't like that. They make adapters for this stuff, so I ordered the proper adapter, went to a -6AN, which goes to the 1/8 inch elbow into just a regular old, Summit brand fuel pressure gauge. Like I said, I do like the idea of putting these in getting a remote pressure gauge. They make them with sending units now. You don't really want to put a pressurized fuel line into your car, so don't do that in my opinion. But they make electronic ones now. It'd be good to monitor it while you're driving. But in general, if these things that I'm mentioning are correct, this thing is going to run. And it's probably going to run pretty well. It's pretty rare that the stock tunes that come with this don't adjust correctly. If you have variables in your system, variable fuel pressure, especially, or something that's not working right, like a bad injector because it's clogged, they do go bad. It happens, but it's more likely because it's got dirt in it. I've never had one go bad. It's, those are all things you got to watch out for. In general, these things work pretty well. I have, however, had a ECU, which is right here, go bad. The ECU's here. The map sensor is also inside of here. They don't like heat. I had one go bad, and all it would do was, it ran fine, but all it would do is make the handheld unit restart constantly. It was a stupid problem, and Fitech is not too far from me. I live in Southern California, so it was a drive over there. They replaced it. It lasted about 6 weeks or so, I think, and then it ran fine. I pulled it in the driveway one day, and then I couldn't get it started again. It was another bad unit. They don't like heat. You know, electronics just don't like heat. And I don't care what anybody from Fitech says. You know, it's not a good idea to have the ECU on here, but I do like it because it's real clean. It's a good install. I just put a 1/2-inch phenolic spacer on here, and I haven't had one problem since. It keeps the throttle body so much cooler. It doesn't, you know, I hear a lot of guys also talking about vapor lock from the heat. You can't vapor lock 60 psi. That just doesn't happen, in my opinion. I've never had that problem either. So, you know, that's not really the reason to put this on here. It's really to keep the heat away, you know. So I have had 0 problems, and I checked it with an IR gun. You know, it made a 30-degree difference. You know, that's a big difference for something like this. 30 degrees cooler. So that is those are some pointers that I have from this. You know, you got to have clean wiring. You don't want your tach signal. You don't want your tach signal getting close to ignition wires. I routed mine down underneath away. I don't have a traditional distributor on this, obviously. I've got a DIS system from MSD, which I did some videos on that as well. But I routed that away. It goes up. It's in a nice wiring harness. It comes over to my MSD controller. You know, these things do have issues with noise. My opinion, my experience as an electrical engineer by trade, you know, you need a shielded wire for something like a tach signal. It's sensitive. It's a very low voltage that you're talking about, and it's influenced easily by noise, by high EMF, which would be from coils, or especially when you're jumping a gap in a cap and rotor, that'll cause issues. There's a lot of guys that put tin foil around the wire and it works. My suggestion to Fitech is to use shielded wire for those signal wires in the future. That'll solve this problem, but I never had that problem. I am not doing timing control with this because the MSD system does that for me. So some guys with timing control I know have issues. Other guys that don't use timing control have issues. I've never had a noise issue, but wire routing is really important. You don't want to be parallel, especially parallel to anything that's high voltage or noisy alternator output as well, because alternators are AC generators. They convert to DC through diodes, but they have a lot of AC noise inside because it starts out as AC. It's rectified. Those are the kind of basic tips that I have regarding the Fitech units. Because there's a lot of guys that go, you know, those things are junk. Well, some aspects of it are, I agree. There are a number of components that are made in China, you know, and in general, you know, I find that things that are made in China are just, the quality control just isn't there, the material control isn't there, but it is relatively affordable. I think it's well engineered. It is engineered here. It was designed here. I think it's a relatively good design. There's some things that could be improved upon, but in general, follow those pointers, and I'm sure that you'll have a much easier time with an install, you know. So fuel filter, larger, 10 micron filter. The bigger the filter, the better, close to the throttle body, clean wiring, clean fuel system, make sure you flush it good. Fuel pressure is very important. Make sure that that's where it's supposed to be, and make sure your injectors are working. Those are things that'll kind of help you. I'm not saying you won't have other problems or things don't happen, because they do, but it's a lot more rare. Those are kind of the few things that I've witnessed.